Hello and welcome to Advertising, a short history and a web difference. The purpose of this video is to give a brief outline of the history of advertising over the last 100 to 150 years, and to bring us up to the point where we can look at the differences that the web may be bringing about in this arena. Advertising has of course been around since people began to sell goods in one form or another, but advertising as we would recognise it really began with the advent of the Gutenberg press. Initially, handbills were printed to be handed out on the street, which were purely made to advertise a certain product or meeting. Then this moved on to booksellers including in their printed works adverts for other printed works, and then of course newspapers came and advertising expanded once again. The thing I want to highlight most about printed adverts, and particularly those in newspapers, is their one-dimensional nature. We encounter them as we flick through a newspaper, and we either read them or we don't. We can choose to ignore it, or we can choose to engage with it. If we choose to engage with it, we just have to take it at face value. We read what we read, and we decide whether or not to believe it or whether or not to buy something. And there's not much interaction between us and the advert. Radio was the next great medium for advertising, and it brought with it some important changes. Essentially, you could finally talk to your audience. You could have what would be almost a pseudo-conversation. It felt like there was a conversation, even though the interaction was all one way. You could also enter your audience's mind and place a jingle with them that they would remain with them, and they would take it with them wherever they went. So if they were in a shop and deciding whether to buy Coca-Cola or Pepsi, they could maybe recall the jingle and it would make them think which product they might want to buy. And the importance of this kind of pseudo-conversation style is highlighted by the fact that in 1938 radio surpassed magazines as the premier advertising medium. Television provides with it a chance to make the pseudo-conversation with the consumer even more elaborate. The first TV spot was in 1941, and it featured a Bulova clock ticking for 60 seconds. It was the ident that began and ended the broadcast. And from these small beginnings, of course, they got a lot better, to the point where now Super Bowl advertising is worth millions and millions of dollars, and is almost as important to some people as the Super Bowl itself, and provides a form of cultural entertainment rather than just advertising products. Fast forwarding now to the 1970s, I just want to highlight the regulation began to be brought in as people recognized the power of advertising. And the 1970s was a particularly important era for this in America because it brought about with it three pieces of legal developments. In 1971, Congress prohibited broadcast advertising of cigarettes in recognition of the power that advertising cigarettes using the broadcast medium had. In 1975, the Federal Trade Commission's Improvements Act finally gave the agency power to set industry-wide rules and standards, and it gave them the teeth to be able to take people who violated these standards to court, to federal courts. Now, 1976 saw a different development in the fact that the Supreme Court finally granted advertising First Amendment protection, again recognizing the importance that speaking through advertising has. Fast forward 20 years and we arrive at Marlboro Friday, and this is the story of the death and resurrection of the Marlboro Man. Marlboro cigarettes were sold as a premium brand, and this was based on the image that they cultivated through advertising. They relied upon this image to give value to their cigarettes, and in 1993, the makers of Marlboro cigarettes announced price cuts and promotions. This was a huge shock to the market, as it seemed to be a recognition that advertising alone couldn't sell a product. There needed to be competition on either price or quality. The market suddenly thought branding doesn't work anymore, and went into a kind of a mini meltdown in the advertising arena. And it turns out they were wrong, and Naomi Klein's book, No Logo, provides a brilliant account of this and the way in which the market reacted, which essentially was more advertising. But I include it here to highlight that the foundations of advertising and the foundations of branding, particularly, are quite shaky. We can have our confidence knocked in the power of advertising quite easily, even though we all recognise it generally as an incredibly powerful medium and a very powerful force in society, particularly capitalist society. I move now quickly to the advent of the web and beginning with web ads. Initially, advertisers saw the web as a medium very similar to newspapers. It was seen as a text and picture-based medium, and the only really exciting development for advertisers was that once you'd managed to capture your audience with the advert you'd taken, the hyperlink allowed them to close the gap between advert and consumption, between the advertiser and the consumer product, so that if you want to know your credit score, you can instantly click on it and you can supposedly find out. Things started to get cleverer, and one of the real kind of innovations was the advent of technologies like Google AdWords. They weren't the first to do this, but they're perhaps the most successful. And what this does is it tries to learn almost intelligently what you are doing when you're on a certain page on the web. So if you're reading your email, it passes your email to find out if you're talking about something in particular and provides a hopefully relevant advert that you might want to click on. The same with if you're looking on a web page, or indeed if you're doing a search, you would get AdWords related to the search. This is extended to Facebook advertising, which is supposedly even more refined, because advertisers here are given by the users of Facebook a profile that tells them everything they could possibly want to know about them. It tells them their interests, their activities, their favourite bands, their favourite books, their favourite products, even now with the fans application. And what this allows is for advertisers to target not just on what you're looking, but what you're interested in might be. And sometimes, obviously, they get this wrong. And David Weinberger, in our class on advertising, told us about a study that showed that really they can only get it right about 20% of the time, or really truly accurate 20% of the time compared to a human. And of course, you get errors which can often be very damaging to people who are advertising. The thing to notice about the adverts on the web that I've just highlighted is they're still, in a sense, one-dimensional. There's no real conversation with the audience. The web has brought about different possibilities. The video you're seeing now is essentially a viral advert in which the users interact with it because they take it and they send it on to their friends, and they may even decide to try and replicate it, or may produce a fan site about it. But there's more of interaction between the advert and the consumer. And as we get towards the end of this advert, we'll see that this is the beginnings of a real change, almost a sea change in advertising, the way products are conceived by consumers. This is, of course, the web difference that I've been driving towards in the process of making this video. And it's been highlighted by David Weinberger and Doc Searles in the book Clue Train Manifesto, in a chapter they wrote in it. And the essential difference is that advertising is no longer this one-way street. It's now a conversation. A very good example of this that we were taught about in class is Amazon.com. On every page they provide a forum in which people can, normal users can tell people what they thought of the book or whatever product it is that happen to be buying on Amazon. And this is incredibly powerful because rather than having to trust an advert, you trust the experiences in the real world of users. Blogs have brought about a similar revolution as the one which Amazon, the example, highlights. And this is that even though blogs may be a repository where an expert tells a non-expert something about the product, they almost invariably have a comments field. This comments field can be used by a user to either pose a question further of the reviewer, or to correct something the reviewer has said, or just provide some information that's been missed out. And it provides an interactivity which is lost from the traditional review in a newspaper, and particularly obviously from advertising literature in newspaper or radio and web or newspapers. And this is another extension of a conversation. This is an example of a conversation which can't be controlled by manufacturers, but which, of course, they can influence. Forums are another area where manufacturers are starting to get involved. They might put a forum on their site which helps provide users with a place where they can get a kind of informative and a kind of designated, officially expert opinion on something, so they can ask a question, or they can ask other users who may well be quite expert to help them out with things that might be going wrong with a product. But then this shows that the times when the manufacturer starts to intervene in these conversations are very delicate. I mean, we need to think about ways in which, not necessarily this is regulated by law, but ways in which kind of social norms are going to build up around what the manufacturer can and can't do in this conversation, and ways in which people can influence this either from a legal perspective or from any other perspective. Particularly, I mean, this revolution has come from a kind of a grassroots, user-empowered medium, so the chances are the solution will lie there rather than with kind of top-down introduction of regulation by law. But this is a question that the rest of the videos on this site hope to explore, and I hope you've enjoyed watching this one. Thank you.